Welcome back to Madmen Cross the Water, the adventures of the Sons of Town Hall, tales of exhilaration and exploration, of ingenuity and innovation, of wonder and woe.
Madmen cross the water to get from A to B. Madmen cross the water, just you wait and see.
We shall begin very far from where we left off. If you recall, when last we spoke, George and Josiah were brought back from the brink by the great white whale herself. No land in sight. Well, where we find them today, the sea is nowhere in sight. In fact, it would require at least 60 hard hours on horseback, and an able-bodied horse at that, to get to the coast. When the boys finally washed ashore, they found themselves quite shockingly not in England where they were bound. No, they weren't anywhere east of the Atlantic at all. Due to some grave navigational errors, unfavourable winds, and some terrible advice, they found themselves, of all places, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. About as close to the centre of the new land as could be expected for two without a compass between them. We'll skip over the strange series of events that led them there and simply catch up with them where they ultimately settled for a season, based on a tip received by a tobacco farmer from North Carolina. Yes, there they are, on Old Man Murphy's farm. Of course, Tulsa was not then what it has become now, which admittedly still isn't much. But back then, you would have been forgiven if you rode right past it without noticing. In fact, were it not for the sound and smell of the hogs, our handsome heroes may well have missed Tulsa entirely. They didn't miss it, though, and in late August of '96 they found their way to Old Murphy's plot, just in time for the squash harvest. Before we get ahead of ourselves, though, I have a particularly delightful piece of news, which I'd like to share. Maybe you already detected that something grand was afoot by the tone of my voice. No? Well, as some of you may know now that we find ourselves in our third episodes which have taken quite a lot more research and reconnaissance than I had budgeted for, I have been seeking a sponsor. There are quite a few wealthy widows who naturally are fond admirers of George and Josiah, and so we assumed our search would bear quick fruit. But it turns out that each of the many septuagenarians who have written letters of interest also wanted, and indeed expected, to extract certain, how shall I put this delicately, perks and privileges that, well, offended George and even made Josiah a bit uneasy. So I've spent a good portion of my dwindling free time knocking up a host of haberdashers and barbers, shipbuilders and barrel makers, butchers and blacksmiths. All the obvious choices to see if we could procure some money for the depleted coffers in exchange for some prime advertising real estate. Maybe you know where this is going already, but just this morning, as I was taking my constitutional, I was approached by... God, it feels like a drum roll is in order. I was approached by a one Lloyd Craster, master carpenter. I assume most of you are familiar with Mr. Craster's work, but for the few of you who aren't, he is a craftsman of the first and finest degree, and they say his work lasts a lifetime. "Worthington!" he hollered, catching up to me. "Is that you, Worthington?" Well, I told him that it was, and no sooner did I explain this project of mine than he wrote out a cheque for our first advertisement. So, before we begin, I finally can utter the words I've been waiting to say since the outset of these meditations. Let us pause now for a word from our sponsor. Got plans for the afterlife? Don't wait until it's too late. Stop by Craster's Caskets today and let us design your next home. After all, let's be honest, you'll be in it for a lot longer than the home you're living in now. Craster's Caskets will craft you the best hardwood coffin money can buy with optional add-ons like a lid that can open from the inside or a brass bell, should you be placed inside prematurely. Every body type and budget will be accommodated. Craster's Caskets, the best in this world for the rest in the next world.
Don't put your ash in a basket, rest in a Craster's casket.
Craster's Caskets take no responsibility for premature burial. Thank you, Mr. Craster. Now then, the boys had finally arrived after quite a curious and thorny journey to Old Man Murphy's farm, with the hope of finding employment and perhaps a crust of bread and a roof overhead. Oh, wait. We can't start yet. First, we must turn to your letters. Yes, plural. I believe we received 4 this week. Not too shabby. Not too shabby at all. And, not surprisingly, most of what we received was in a woman's hand. Perfumed envelopes with locks of hair, lipstick marks, promises of affection, and terms of endearment certainly not appropriate for the vast majority of our dear listeners. However, I have felt it only fair to share at least one from the batch that came in, and so I found an envelope here that seems plain enough that one could safely assume its contents will neither embarrass nor offend.
Send in your letters, send in your love, for the attention of Elias B.
Dear Elias, what a history George and Josiah have had, and we're only just beginning. Thank you for sharing these rich and wonderful stories. It has been years since I have been so thoroughly transported and transformed. I hope these chats will continue forever. I would love to know of some of the people Sons of Town Hall came across when they finally were on dry land. Did they meet any colorful characters out there? And do any of their acquaintances stand out? Did they ever think of becoming a trio? I shall say an extra prayer during grace that you might respond. And also, though I may blush as I write this, and though I'm of course fond of both the singers, there are a few ladies in my bridge group who would sure like to know more about you. What color eyes do you have? And what do you enjoy doing in your spare time? Until then, we shall be listening, as always. Your admirer, Catherine Whitfield, Memphis, Tennessee.
Send in your letters, send in your love, for the attention of Elias B.
My. Now look who's blushing. My apologies to the children and the churchgoers if our friend from Memphis has made you a little hot under the collar. But, well, sweet cat, my eyes are a robin's egg blue, and in my small breaths of free time I do enjoy a good game of mumblety-peg as well as long strolls along the old footpaths across the moors. But to your more consequential question about whether or not the boys met any colourful characters, your timing couldn't be better. For today, Catherine, you shall indeed meet one of the vast assemblage of eccentric bedfellows George and Josiah encountered and bunked down with over their many years. Shall we begin? Old Man Murphy was not a wealthy man, but his acreage was fertile, with water available, something not so common in those parts, and so he considered himself a lucky man. Naturally, he was a hogman, as pig raising had been his family's trade since the 90s, the 1790s, that is. He had fields of corn, a great apple and pear orchard, and a pumpkin patch that was a sight to behold. But Murphy grew squash as well, lots and lots of orange beauties, and Mrs. Murphy kept a dozen or so rows of vegetables. Those were mostly for family consumption, for pickling and canning to get them through the cold months. The missus had the run of the household, keeping track of the finances which were, as they say, tighter than a barrel band around a whiskey keg. Having just one daughter and no sons of their own, Murphy and his wife would hire pickers when it came time for the harvesting. The work was hard and the wages meagre. But when the boys found themselves lost and very, very hungry out on the Oklahoma prairie, the promise of room and board and $1 a day, albeit to be shared between them, seemed like a dream. Truth be told, it was also the glimpse they got of Murphy's daughter milking the goats that made the two readily agree to the terms. Naturally, each believed the freckled farm girl would be in his arms by week's end. Well, that proved not to be the case, nor was the board as plentiful as they might have liked or assumed, given the fields of crops all around and the animals neighing and braying everywhere in sight. And while we're being frank, the room was less of a room and more of a hayloft, which, though dry and relatively warm, caused terrible bouts of sneezing and itching, and ultimately 2 cases of scabies, neither of which cleared entirely until late the following April. Still, the loft was a vast improvement from their always wet and unstable raft, not to mention the bare, unyielding earth that often constituted their bed whilst wandering the rugged land. And so, despite the discomfort of their digs, after their long days in Murphy's field under the unflinching Oklahoma sun, they often slept where they fell, boots and hats still on. They had been sleeping up in that hayloft for perhaps a fortnight before they first sensed that maybe they weren't alone. Now, lucky for us, George and Josiah kept a journal on dry land as well. And you'll be pleased to know that I prepared properly for today's telling, so I already have the old book opened to the relevant page. 30th of August, 1896. Spotted something clearly moving
in the hay upon laying down this evening. We figured on there being some vermin up and about in a spot like that, so we weren't initially bothered. George took it for an opossum, or possibly a large rat, but I knew opossum and rats, and that wasn't either. When we heard it exhale, the breath was far heavier than a small rodent or a marsupial could possibly make. It got us really thinking. Could a bear have climbed up into the hay?
The entry goes on to describe how the two huddled together in their nightgowns and lit their lantern. Gingerly, as much was burnable up there, and Murphy had made it quite clear that this was the 3rd barn he had built. They leaned in toward the weak beam of light their lantern cast and peered nervously into the far corner of the barn. The lump in the hay was unmistakable. How they hadn't noticed it before, neither could say. The entry continues in George's hand. What we saw was about the length of a
skinny mule. Or at least skinny by Josiah's standards, bulky by mine. Whatever it was had some heft. I approached first, Josiah just behind me. We were scared. 1 foot in front of the other we approached. Then I couldn't take it, and Josiah took the lead. He stepped into the triangle of light, and eventually, and very tentatively, towed the corner of the mound. Then we both ran back to the opposite corner of the loft as fast as we possibly could.
Well, the response came like heat lightning over Texas. Up shot a man, older than St. Jerome himself, naked as the days before the fall, bony as an Irishman in the famine. He would later prove to have a beard down to his ribcage as well, and no more than 4 teeth. But this they couldn't yet see in the weak light. What they could make out, however, was a double-barrel shotgun, both of whose barrels were pointed directly at the boys. Silly for me to keep interrupting the narrative when the boys transcribed it almost to the word.
Jumpin' Jebediah!
He shrieked, springing clear out of his hay-hiding spot.
Who in holy hell are you boys, and what in tarnation you doing in those hats?
Easy, old man. We mean you no harm. We're the hired help. This is our bedroom.
Your bedroom? I've been sleeping up here for months.
Months?
Months! Since late last winter, at least.
Does Murphy know you're up here?
Who the hell is Murphy?
The man began to laugh and wheeze and cough. He eventually got a hold of himself and continued.
Of course Murphy don't know I'm up here, whoever Murphy is.
That apparently set off another curious bout of laughter. Ultimately, the boys promised him that they wouldn't alert Murphy either if he would just lower that gun. He soon relaxed, but it wasn't until the boys produced a bottle of brown liquor that the gun descended. They talked the better part of the night. The old man still naked, the boys still in their hats. They learned that the man's name was Karl.
That's Karl with a K!
He barked. His ancestors were Irish peasants, but he had left his family back in West Virginia and had basically been barn-hopping since. He caught or stole what he could to eat, which wasn't much based on his protruding ribcage and jawbones.
I haven't really worked more than a day or two in a decade.
He boasted, and then began another fit of wheezy laughter.
Oh, dear me. Darn.
The boys told him that they weren't much for manual labor either. Even under the Oklahoma sun, and even in their scarves and tailcoats, the two rarely broke a sweat. In fact, they explained, despite the hard conditions and minimal wage, they felt they were getting the better of old Murphy.
Karl liked that, but then he withdrew and grew very quiet for a while. Eventually, he asked for the bottle, he raised it high, and in what seemed like a non sequitur, toasted to our families back home. We drank heartily, but then explained to him that home for us had been nothing but a source of trouble and pain. Karl didn't respond. His heart seemed suddenly heavy.
Hardest worker on either side of the Atlantic was my dad. Never a more honest man would you meet. I'm afraid I've let him down.
And then he told us of his dear younger brother, who he hadn't seen in some half a century.
Daniel was his name. Crippled in an accident with a plow when he was no more than 8. Since Dad was always working, I more or less raised the boy myself. We had lots of plans, little Danny and me.
Karl began to cry right there in the loft. And so Josiah offered him a handkerchief, which he blew into loud and long.
I don't know why I ever left. Don't even know if he's still...
We didn't know what to say, so we finally told him that we liked to sing when our hearts were heavy. We offered Karl a song, telling him that lately we'd been singing this one in the fields to keep our minds off the work and off Murphy's daughter. Seeing as how much he and we had been travelling, we sang him our ode to the patron saint of travel, St. Christopher.
Oh, Saint Christopher, let me go, don't pull me away, let me stay right here.
Apparently, the boys only got a good minute or so in before Karl cut them off. He wiped his tears away with his forearm and told them to hold it right there. Then he dove down into the straw beside where he sat. His entire upper half disappeared as he pulled one thing after another out of the stack of hay. All the boys could see were his 2 bony legs waving around out of the heap as one buried item after another was unearthed. A cast-iron kettle, a hole-ridden pair of long johns, a Bible, a tabby cat.
Jumpin' Jebediah! Where is that blasted claw hammer?
Karl kept grunting and cursing, hollering,
It's in here somewhere!
but finding whatever it was he was after in that haystack wasn't so easy. At last he arose, gasping for air, with his prized possession in hand, a wide, toothless grin and a glimmer in his eye. Buried somewhere in the hay was a 3-string banjo, its skin torn, its neck warped. Still, Karl took it up, brushed it and himself off, and began to play. It was a sound neither expected or had heard before, or would ever hear again.
It was more like the sound of a midnight raid in a banjo factory rather than any kind of accomplished or experienced playing technique.
It was an assault to all our senses. I felt it physically and it hurt. It almost made me want to give up music entirely. I've never been so hurt by sound.
So we asked him if he could just put the banjo down and sing.
Apart from George's voice, I've never heard a voice so astonishingly beautiful. It brought me to the fields in Kentucky. It brought me to sun after the rain. It brought me to St. Paul's Cathedral. It was a gorgeous, gorgeous voice.
Karl sang a version of Danny Boy that brought tears to all 6 of their eyes. It transported the boys back over the land they had wandered and the sea that had on so many occasions nearly broken them. It reminded them of the holy power of song and why they too were singers.
'Tis I'll be here in sunshine or in shadow. Oh, Danny boy, ah, Danny boy, I love you so.
Then and there they asked him to join their troupe, and thus began one of the more fascinating periods in the band's long and storied history. It took quite a lot of convincing to coax Karl out of his insistence on playing his banjo, but once they did, he hit the high notes sweeter than you'd hear from any prepubescent German boys' choir or woodland nightingale. In fact, George finally pried the banjo free from Karl's claws and began plucking a few chords.
Keep playing it like that, my boy.
He told George.
Follow me. I got one for you.
When the wind blows o'er the fields, I'll be bound for Santa Fe. I'm gonna lay my trial and troubles down, all the west pulls me away. Broken promise, broken bottles pile up on the floor. Oh, to hold you in my arms once more.
And so, for 3 months during the shoulder season of '97, the Sons of Town Hall did, in fact, perform as a trio. Sadly, no recordings remain of those days, and in fact, there are only a few grainy black and white pictures left as well. They cut quite a look, though. The boys appear more dapper and dashing than ever, their pocket squares matching the feathers in their hats. Neither is smiling, as was the way in the early days of the medium. Karl, however, is grinning like a schoolboy who has just stumbled upon a trove of skin magazines. His 2 visible teeth are clenched down on a long blade of grass. He's shirtless beneath his threadbare overalls. And even though not allowed to play it, he's clutching his trusty 3-string banjo like it's a big-mouth bass he's just pulled from a lake. Well, it would be fitting to conclude with that image. However, I'd be remiss if I didn't reveal the strangest twist in this already strange story. Late in '97, Karl disappeared after what then felt like a hometown gig as they passed back through Tulsa.
2 days later, when we were circling back to Old Man Murphy's place to see if he might need some field hands again, the old couple were weeping at the kitchen table.
It turned out that their sweet daughter had disappeared as well. She'd run off, or so we were told, with none other than Karl himself.
All along, it was neither George nor Josiah who had caught the eye of that sweet flower of the field, but Karl. Old four-toothed Karl, who may not have been able to get a pretty note out of a banjo, but apparently still knew how to woo a woman with his silver-throated song. And so, just like that, the boys were without their third man, without the girl they each were certain was fond of him, and maybe more significantly, without the promise of employment or even secure lodging. And so, that's where we'll leave them, as we wrap up this installment. On the move again, bound for they did not know where, under the endless western sky, with nothing to count on, no one to lean on, but each other.
I'm gonna ride the rails, cross the rolling hills to the setting of the sun. And we'll pass the whiskey round the fire until the morning comes. Broken promise, broken bottles piled up on the floor. I'm not the kind of man who stays behind an open door. Oh, to hold you in my arms. Oh, to hold you in my arms. Oh, to hold you in my arms once more.
I've been Elias B. Worthington. Thanks again to Craster's Caskets. Be sure to drop by for a fitting today. And keep those letters coming. Links to the Sons of Town Hall website and social media can be found in the episode description.
To support Madmen Cross the Water, go to patreon.com/Sons of Town Hall.